Good afternoon. My name is Joe Coughlin. I'm director of the MIT Age Lab, and I have the delightful duty of being your moderator today. Next Century Cities, new design for an aging demography. Essentially is, we're all getting older, and where are we going to live? And chances are that may be the city. Just want to do a little bit of level setting before I introduce my panel. You know, most panels, particularly even at a great conference such as Milken, address one driving force, and that's enough to fill an hour, let alone a few days. This panel, we have very big chops. We want to address two converging issues that are being driven by demography worldwide. The first, if you will, is urbanization. The fact that we're all moving toward mega cities around the world. I want you to think about this. Over the next 3 years, 1.5 billion people will be moving into cities. And by 2050, that number jumps up to about 15 billion will be moving into cities worldwide. 1.5 billion and 3 billion by 2050. Many of those folks are going to be older. Chances are it'll be some of us in this room, people that are moving in because they are bringing their loved ones, their older parents with them. Chances are they're moving there for economic opportunity, and we will, shall we say, age in place. So the question is, will those cities be age ready? Will they be age friendly? What do we have to think about in terms of the infrastructure around health, transportation, housing? By the way, social activities, having something fun to do, not just the things that we need. So the cities are going to have many challenges. This is going to be only one of them. So on that note, I'd like to kind of introduce our panel and ask them to kind of give a 30-second perspective, and then we'll get into Q&A, and hopefully with a little bit of time, maybe we can go to you as well. I'm going to make the bios very short because they're in the book if you want to see more. To my far right is Mike Hoden. He's Executive Director of the Global Coalition on Aging and Managing Partner of the High Lantern Group. He works with industry and leaders worldwide. Nora Supra, to my immediate right, Executive Director of the White House Conference on Aging, I believe an alum of AARP as well, and leading a national discussion on aging and our nation's future. To my left is Paul Irving, chairman of the home team, if you will, the Milken Institute Center for Future and Aging, as well as a distinguished scholar in residence at the University of Southern California, and the editor of the book Upside on Aging, which I think is definitely worth the read. It's in the bookstore here. And to my far left, Fernanda Torres-Gil, who, as I'm looking at the group of us, is the only person who's actually delivered real services to an aging society, is director of the Center for Policy Research on Aging at University of California, Los Angeles, and former Assistant Secretary of Aging under the Clinton administration. So, Mike, do you want to give a little just perspective statement on what you're thinking about in terms of cities and the like?
Well, it's also true as I look at us, there's none of us who are that young, actually, which is a problem. Because we've talked about this, and when one talks about the aging phenomenon, the aging of our population, and even we have the term the Global Coalition on Aging, the problem is that automatically you think about, oh, this is about a lot of old people. And yes, that's true. But it's really about this profound demographic shift, which is taking place globally and is with us at least through the next 2 or 3 generations. We actually know the numbers. It's built in. So, you know, I think your point is well taken. We were talking before that this is, yes, about what do we do with respect to our current demographic shift around those who are, shall we say, 55 or 60 plus. It's a particular moment in time. But even, I would suggest more importantly, what are the institutional changes, the public policy reforms, and urban infrastructure change for an age friendliness throughout the life course? And so maybe we're beginning to talk about age neutral. What's good for someone who has to live in a city if they're 82 should also be good for someone who's 23.
So if we're talking about institutions, that sounds like a great segue to you, Nora.
Thanks, Joe. I think just a little history making. We've been doing a White House Conference on Aging every decade since 1961. You know, we were talking a little before about how some things haven't changed and how some things have changed dramatically. And I think what's changed so dramatically is how many people in our country are experiencing aging, whether it's seeing their grandparents go through the aging process or their parents and dealing with the different services or supports that they may need. This is unprecedented because we're living longer than ever before. When we designed the Medicare program, the Social Security program, we thought people would die soon after 65. So we didn't have long plans for how to keep these programs solvent and how to make sure they were moving forward. When companies put in retirement plans, again, they thought people would really be ending their careers at 65, 66, 67. Now we have literally 10,000 people a day in this country turning 65, and redefining what that means for being an older American. This demographic shift that we're experiencing, though, it isn't temporary, it's permanent. We're not replaced, we don't have the younger generations coming behind, and people are living longer than ever before. So we, as other countries across the world, need to really look at this as an opportunity for us to restructure, rethink how we live in cities, how we live in our homes, how we live in communities, all generations together, because it's really something that is going to affect us and does affect us every single day. People are going through these things, talking about it at their own kitchen tables. So I think, as opposed to past White House conferences on aging, everywhere I go, all across the nation, people can relate to what we're talking about. They know some of the challenges that they're facing in their own families, and looking at how can we make this better for my parents, for my children, for my families as we move forward.
Well, you and your team have done some groundbreaking work in looking at the numbers behind age-friendly cities. Tell us your perspective.
Well, so Joe, as you know, we came up with this notion of an initiative to measure and assess the ability of cities to accommodate older adults. And again, I would echo Mike's comments, and that is that an age-friendly city is ultimately a friendly city for all ages. There had been a kind of a series of poll-based analyses that had been done over the years, but no one had actually looked at the data. So I sat down with a group of our economists, and we said, so how can we come up with a methodology to actually measure? Facts are stubborn things; they're hard to argue with. Measure the range of characteristics in housing and transportation infrastructure and health and education and a range of other areas, and determine what cities were actually doing. And of course, we also thought, what levers can we use to incent behavior? And we kind of said to ourselves, people like to compete. So let's appeal to the worst of human nature for virtuous reasons and create a rankings competition. So we did this for the first time in 2012. It got a remarkable response. We're not the only ones who do something like this. AARP has a brand new program which we applaud, and the WHO that we work with closely has its Age-Friendly Cities initiative. Our thesis is that because and I'm going to be graceful with Nora here. Things are so challenged inside the Beltway, so politicized. It's so hard to move the ball and to accomplish sensible policy change that, frankly, many people, certainly in the middle of both parties, embrace. But you know, the election cycle and all the other challenges of interest groups really impede so much progress. Cities tend to be led by nonpartisan leaders, or at least leaders identified as nonpartisan leaders for those purposes. And cities are engines of change, kind of laboratories of experimentation. So we saw more creativity going on in cities than we did in national governments, and we said that's something that should be celebrated and elevated and discussed and it's
copied where possible.
And copied where possible, and it's had remarkable response.
So Fernando, you've had the advantage of being at the federal level at one point. As a fellow colleague academic, you get the privilege of watching across the country, if not the world. What's your perspective on aging in cities?
Well, first, let me say that it's so cool that we are rediscovering the value of cities in an aging society. And as an Angelino, I'm a proud urbanite, and we have a home in downtown Los Angeles. But also as a person aging with a disability, I am finding that living downtown in a city gives me tremendous advantages and opportunities as I grow older with the disability. Therefore, I have a real stake in how cities respond, not just to those of us who are growing older, but those of us that might have a physical cognitive limitation, and how cities can be more amenable to different variations of how we age. But I am also a Latino, and I have seen in Los Angeles several decades of white flight, where many people escape to the suburbs and rural areas. So it's cool that older whites are coming back to the city and younger millennials are coming back to the city. But I am concerned about those populations that sustained cities during that period. In this case, it was Latinos and immigrants and Koreans and Asians that kept downtown and central LA sustainable. But now with the return back to the city by young millennials and older whites, which is wonderful, we now have to face the issue of gentrification, increasing rents, increasing cost of living, and potential displacement of those diverse populations. So I hope we can bring in the discussion the issues of aging and disability, but diversity and immigration.
Access to markets as well as access to physical facilities as well. I want to pick up on that point a little bit and blend it with Paul's work, because we make the assumption that in an urban area that there's the intensity and the density and the concentration of activities that make living more fun and quality of life and perhaps even easier to access. And while the Americans with Disabilities Act guarantees access, access does not guarantee easy. And I guess one of the things we need to think about in terms of, what is the infrastructure that's out there, how can it be navigated by disabled as well as elderly, and those are not necessarily the same, is a big issue. But I want to turn to Paul. As we look at infrastructures, we look at things like transportation and housing. How are we doing? Remember, for those who were old enough, Ed Koch used to ask in New York City, "How am I doing?"
How are we doing? It's a mix, which is one of the reasons why we developed this ranking system. There are some cities that have natural advantages, right? So Joe, you're a Bostonian, relatively small city.
Big attitude.
Small city, big attitude, and some good sports teams. Incredible educational infrastructure, strong transportation infrastructure, some housing challenges and expense challenges.
Yeah, to Fernando's point.
To Fernando's point. So compare that to Los Angeles, for example, where we have very weak public transit infrastructure. We're making progress. For the first time in my lifetime, I'm a native Angelino, but that's a process that's going to take decades. I think what cities present the opportunity to do is to think about what they do well, and different cities do different things well. One of the things that we don't have great transportation in Los Angeles. We have great health infrastructure. We have fabulous educational institutions. We have rich cultural opportunities. We have great weather. Our streets aren't as walkable as they could be and should be. They need to be more walkable. So we'll work on transportation. That'll be a process that will more likely benefit millennials as they age than boomers as they age. But I think every city has the opportunity to improve, and I see improvement. I see mayoral interest in this. I see civic leadership interest in this, business leadership interest in it, because at the end of the day, what's good for an aging population, what's good for a diverse population is also good for the business population. It's good for civil society. It enriches us all.
This quality of life can also argue for the competitive advantage of the city itself.
Yeah.
The trouble is, this is a huge issue. It's too big for any one city. So Nora, you've been listening to America and what they're saying about aging, if you will, on the White House Conference on Aging tour. Are there some things that are perking to the top that the federal government and the various agencies, I mean, the city takes in almost every federal department as an interest area. And one of the challenges is getting to speak with one voice. Have you heard some innovative ideas or at least dominant complaints that we can address?
Well, when you were speaking earlier, Fernando, I was reminded we've done several regional forums around the country. We just came back from Cleveland on Monday. We were in Seattle before that. And Seattle in particular has rich and diverse cultures as well. And we visited some senior centers for Asian Americans, and I met with a bunch of them. And they talked about how sometimes they would have to take 3 buses to get there. they really enjoyed this center because it was a place where they found people that were like them. They had dance classes, exercise classes, people that spoke their language, food that was culturally appropriate for Asian Americans. They'd have a Thai night and a Chinese day and different things that they would share with each other. And their biggest complaint was transportation, having to get there and how to get there, that there weren't ways to do that. Now, when a contrast into Cleveland, which has had a long history of also having the city there much colder. In Seattle, they complain about the rain. Could we have covered walkways? How do we get there? In Cleveland, it's all about how do we get out with the snow. And I think I don't want to neglect the rural communities where most people, when you ask them, they prefer to stay where they are and they don't want to move into a city. So I think though technology is really helping us think of new solutions, looking at the shared economy, Uber type services for people in rural communities to help with transportation. So many opportunities as we look at the way that we use technology for people to help monitor their parents if they're living in a remote location, to make sure you can have a conversation with your parent's doctor perhaps now with technology and talk about some of their symptoms. So I think a lot of ways that we can bring each other together and connect on these issues that weren't possible before.
And one of the things we may want to think about is that the sharing economy, I don't know if anyone saw, but Uber is now doing not just pharmacy delivery, they're doing food delivery. There's Uber W, which also has wheelchair accessibility. One of the things we may want to start thinking about is that if we can have so many convenience/assisted services from the sharing economy for an aging society, will we continue to move into the city? Because these are going to also enable people to say, gee, maybe I can stay where I am. But right now, people are moving in. Millennials hopefully will age in place, if you will. Fernando?
Yeah, you raised earlier an issue which I would call governance, and which I think ties this together. At the national level, much of the aging-related health and long-term care programs have been HHS. Housing, HUD.
Right.
Transportation, DOT, for example. But it's only recently that they've begun to address the question, maybe we should be not only working together, but coming up with the integrated local programs that would enable individuals who need home and community-based services, need home renovations, need accessible transportation, need to be able to access Medicare and Medi-Cal, Medicaid-type payments. As a board member of AARP, I'm pleased to say that we've convened those federal agencies to focus on some potential model projects so we can demonstrate in the cities if we can not only provide Medicare and long-term care, but the requisite housing, transportation, and social services, we could further enable individuals, whether they're in suburban or even rural, but especially in urban areas, to be able to have the ancillary services so that they can stay in that place regardless of their physical or mental infirmities.
Kind of Harlem Children's Zone for grown-ups.
That's exactly, yes. It would be that kind of a model.
Yeah.
So one of the one of the great opportunities here, which we see through the Global Coalition on Aging, which is a collection of global companies, cross-sector, Aegon Transamerica. Aegon is the Dutch-based global insurance company. It's Transamerica here in the United States. Intel, BlackRock, Pfizer, Lilly, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. We're finding that as these corporations are beginning to understand the strategic character of this megatrend of aging and understanding both workplace and workforce challenges they have directly and commercial opportunity, you're beginning to get solutions in the private sector. So you have home care being designed by entrepreneurs. Home Instead is an example. Partnering with technology companies to ensure the creation of a smart home. I have no doubt that the funding for where people are going to live will come from a lot of the companies out of, in some cases, direct commercial engagement, and in some cases because they're going to enable and facilitate the workplaces and workforces, which are oftentimes in urban environments. So I'm very hopeful about this. We were talking earlier, there's a book about to be go public, I think in about a week, McKinsey, where they've identified 4 disrupting trends of our era. One is technological change, no surprise. A second is connectedness. A third is urbanization, and a fourth is aging. Now, McKinsey has now identified aging as one of the trends of our time. This is pretty interesting, along with urbanization.
In the words of that great philosopher Yogi Berra, you can see a lot by looking. You know,
Shocking.
But Mike, you don't just work with industry. You get to look at kind of a global view of what's going on. Are there any things that we can take as lessons from other cities around the world?
Well, so you know, it's a good point. There's a lot happening around the world. As others have alluded, the age-friendly city network, as it were, the sort of official WHO network is taking off from Manchester in the UK to a number of cities around China. Obviously, cities in the United States like New York, Portland, and many others. I guess Boston, even though you do have some sports teams as a New Yorker, is about to become an age-friendly city as well. They're looking at it. We have very little data around results, which is an issue. And we look at this about every 6 months. Not that you can really expect much change in 6 months, but we're very impatient. And one of the things that we need to do, in addition to putting the programs in place, is beginning to measure them and put metrics around where the results are going to be. And when you look at the landscape around the world, whether it's the United States, across Europe, in a number of Asian countries from Japan to China, you see a lot that have identified themselves as age-friendly cities, and some good anecdotal evidence, some really good anecdotal evidence, but very little metrics around that, and very little measurement, as Milken has tried to do here in the United States.
I want to pick up a little bit on Nora's discussion around transportation. I mean, that has been an issue for many, many years, particularly for an aging society. In fact, I know in my own research, I uncovered an article that talked about the scourge of older drivers that will be on the streets. The article was written in 1938, and it was talking about anyone over the age of 40. And so, you know, the issue gets relative and old very long. One of the challenges I have is that, let's say we do have a lot of people moving from the suburbs. By the way, 70% of Americans over age 50 live in suburbia and rural America. Let's say a good chunk of them do decide to downsize and pick up and move to the city. I want to ask the group, if you haven't ridden transit for the first 75 years and you're not feeling well enough to drive, are we realistic in saying, I think I'm going to take the bus today? Fernando.
May I address that first? I served for many years on the Los Angeles City Planning Commission. And if it's one thing I learned, homeowners value more than their children their properties and the value of their properties. And a couple of things.
You can get other children. The house
you can
is
get, yeah, but boy, don't you dare mess with my my property or my home or. But in either event, 2 things that I've noticed in places like Los Angeles. NIMBYism and ageism. NIMBYism and ageism. First of all, yes, we are expanding our public transit system, and our mayor and our city departments, you know, are really trying to make LA more livable. But much of the planning is by younger persons. It isn't about older persons that can talk about what it means to be older and to use public transportation or cross a busy crosswalk or try to race that light before it turns red. The other issue we don't deal with is what happens when you lose your driver's license. And California is becoming much stricter about older drivers continuing to drive. Every time there's a horrible accident, the newspapers, the LA Times will first say, an elderly driver. And that gets the state legislator trying to make his or her reputation to further strengthen the DMV laws to make it harder to keep your driver's license over 70. So what happens when you lose your driver's license? And we now face in places like Beverly Hills and parts of Los Angeles, when we try to place a home health agency, a long-term care facility, a boarding care facility, the homeowners the property owners, will resist that. We'll come up with CEQA requirements, whatever it is will prevent this. In Beverly Hills, it took a long time to get Beverly Hills to accept the new light rail because of Beverly Hills High School would be too close to a light rail. So we do have to address honestly the issues of ageism in terms of how we plan for an aging population, and NIMBYism in terms of creating greater acceptance for new populations coming in, including older persons.
Paul, do you think that the data that you've created in with your team, and as well as the ARP Livable Communities calculator that was issued last week, yep, do you think that these could be tools that individuals use? Should we start rethinking retirement planning to be not just do I have financial security, but are the data that you're using to essentially to motivate mayors and kind of benchmark where people are? And do you see a time when maybe when I do my planning, I want to see what cities are good for me?
Absolutely, and this ultimately should be a lifelong process. Look, our objective is we're negative. We're short on retirement. We think that the traditional retirement, Joe, is something that needs to be retired. We need to enable people to continue to work, continue productivity in whatever way they want and they're comfortable with. And this goes to Fernando's point about ageism, which is something that obviously needs to be addressed. But aging is not just, I think it's very important, Nora said earlier, this is not just about baby boomers. This is a permanent state of affairs. So we have to turn this discussion about aging into a discussion for all generations. So young people should, and particularly with the prospects of longevity science potentially dramatically increasing lifespans, we have to rethink really from very early age how we're going to get old. And what does that mean? So what that means is continuing opportunities for education, because the education that one receives at 18, 19, 20 in college, as much as what folks learn from Fernando or at UCLA or Joe today is important, 50 or 60 years from now, the world may have changed dramatically. So we need a different view of education. We need a very different view, as Fernando suggests, of housing, because we need housing that not only accommodates multiple generations, but accommodates us across our lifespan. We need jobs that enable that kind of flexibility. So our interest, by the way, is very much not in encouraging kind of traditional retirement communities, removal and diminishment and disconnection from our lives. We think that's ultimately an unproductive way to age. So we're not trying to get people to move through our analysis. What we're trying to do is improve infrastructure, improve attention, invoking Fernando's point, to get people across generations involved in thinking about how their cities are going to change to accommodate not just the greatest generation or the baby boomers or Gen X or Gen Y, the millennials, but even Gen Z now, the teenagers who were beginning to emerge.
Just ran out of alphabet. We don't know who's coming after that.
We're starting with double A soon. So I think this really is the beginning of a discussion about how we can create really great long-term cities. And again, I think Fernando's a great example of this. I think your experience living in downtown Los Angeles is so much the experience that people are going to realize is the right model for aging in the future. And what that's going to mean is very different zoning and construction notions, different opportunities for design. Fernando, you know that a door that can accommodate a 25-year-old can't necessarily accommodate a wheelchair, but a door that can accommodate a wheelchair can almost always accommodate a 25-year-old. So architecture students and a lot of others need to be thinking about the future.
No one complains about a city that's too safe or too fun or anything else. Mike?
Yeah, just one of the points, and I'm prompted to think about it. One of our colleagues and friends, Catherine Collinson, is with us here from Aegon. Many of us in America know it as Transamerica, but runs a research institute kind of down the street. And one of the things that the White House conference is so great on is to enable, but by the very fact of holding the conference and the very fact of the learning and listening tour that you're holding, to sort of enable and encourage public-private partnerships. And from a very limited but a rich base just a number of the members of the Global Coalition have a set of data, information, and knowledge that becomes the basis for a public-private partnership, because we know things that we didn't know before. You get what Catherine's doing with her institute, a huge amount of data on survey of older workers, what people want, caregiving. You get BlackRock engaged in the topic. You get the healthcare companies that are very much involved, Intel along the technology space. So I think we have an array of information and data that is very rich, particularly in America, that most often does not exist in many of the other countries around the world, that we could really draw on for this public-private platform that then goes forward.
So I just wanted to add something, because I know you all are sort of down on Washington, and I agree. There are a lot of
It's a very livable community.
That's what it actually is.
silos. But one thing, when people think about the Affordable Care Act, they think about coverage, because that's what we've been pushing so much, getting people enrolled. But there are tons of programs in the Affordable Care Act that's experimenting with how to deliver these services better. We've made tremendous progress in home and community-based services and looking at what are the things that we need to not only deliver higher quality care, but more cost-effective care. Because as we said, it doesn't make sense if a person needs a ride to the doctor, they need a ride or they're not going to get the care that they need. Or if to stay healthy, and one of our big emphasis has been healthy aging, that builds into your community. Do you have fresh fruits and vegetables where you are? Are you able to walk? Are you able to do things that improve your health, with overall lower the cost for the federal government, state government, city governments? Because if people stay healthy and prevent things, then it's good for all of us. So again, I think we need to sort of change the discussion away from what are we going to do with these old people that may be moving in or doing this. But all of these things that the age-friendly cities look at is what's good for all of our populations, and ways to get people more active and healthy and engaged. The one thing I would say too is one of the most, two things I'll say. There's one silver bullet for healthy aging, it's physical activity, and that's true for all of us. Yep. In everything we do. We need people to be up and moving more and staying active. And then the other thing that we hear over and over again is civic engagement. People want to be more involved in their communities, doing things that they find brings meaning and purpose to their lives. But the good news about that is that's good for your health too. Sure. We just find getting people out of their homes, leaving people in the suburbs, away from their families, not talking, is not good for their health. People want to engage and interact and find meaning and purpose. So I think all of these things are really positive things that can benefit all of our society.
Okay, can I just, I want to put an exclamation point after Nora's point. So the research shows that purpose improves data, improves statistics on both mortality and morbidity. Fact. Nora's point about exercise. I think I saw a study a day or two ago. 20% of the American public had 0 days of exercise in 2014. That's a disaster. So I'm wearing a Fitbit, and some other people here might have an Apple Watch, but we're a pretty self-selected group. So the notion of democratizing message and opportunity for healthier living through better nutrition and opportunity and ability to exercise, which, by the way, goes to things like well-lit and safe streets and addressing food deserts. The return on investment in those things is extraordinarily powerful. So when we're talking about this, and I think there's sometimes a tendency for people in this field to either be seen as or frankly, maybe to be kind of soft, to see this as just necessarily kind of focused on values, collective responsibility, et cetera. This is return on investment stuff. This is American exceptionalism. This is our opportunity to save huge amounts of money that will otherwise be spent in our healthcare system. And again, cities are great places for these things to be implemented. So addressing ageism, improving opportunities for ongoing work, tax revenue, consumerism, et cetera, continued engagement, purpose, and things like exercise and the availability of health not only makes for better cities, will make us a better country.
So an uncomfortable role for an academic is to actually ask a hard question in terms of where is this, so to speak. So I worked in DC for 10 years, so I'm going to jump on the DC bandwagon for a minute, which is, has this perked up beyond the talking points to subcommittees in Congress where there's funding lines that one might say, yeah, that's an element of livable communities or age-friendly cities? In other words, is this translated into money, or is it translated into hope?
No, there's real
Yeah.
money. I mean, if you look at the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, they've been giving out millions of dollars to communities all across the country to experiment and try these things. And what Congress holds we in the administration accountable for, did you save money? Now, I would say, you know, a big part of the argument in the Affordable Care Act is we have to put some investment in studying these prevention strategies, different ways of delivering services in order to prove the point. So Congress is holding us accountable, but we've been seeing dramatic results already for things that we've been doing to reduce and improve the way chronic conditions are cared for. And, you know, as you said, it's a self-selected group, but I know folks here, it makes perfect sense. If you have diabetes, one of the best things you can do is help someone change their diet and get them to exercise more. And so investing in what are the behavioral changes we need to make, what are the successful programs around the country that we can replicate, and then they can be scaled so that more and more people take advantage of that.
Yep. Right.
Could you, there's some magic in the back that if you call for a slide, you can put it up, I think. If you could put up slide 11. Maybe there's no, oh yeah, okay, here we go. I told you. So we think of what institutions across society need to change in order to address, deal with, respond, and then get to an optimistic place in light of the aging of our population, which is both longevity and the lower birth rates. More old than young. And one of them is cities, we've been talking about that. Another is business. And that is, too, a global phenomenon. And so we have these age-friendly business principles, several of us working with one of Milken's friends in the NGO world, World Economic Forum, but aligned very much with the principles that you have here, Paul. And the idea here is, as was said earlier, and as you said about cities, is to make it, in effect, age neutral. So bring up the next slide, 12, which is sort of a rough notion of what are some of the value, what one could say both from intuitive understanding, anecdotal evidence, and some real data. What are the qualities of quote-unquote an older worker? Because part of the notion is, you know, not to presume that at 57 or 62 we're all, you know, finished and whatever one does, but that you remain active in urban environments, in the workplace, et cetera. And so you see here a few of the components of qualities that we currently may not be measuring. And these are ones that are also qualities that would align to, you know, urban environment, good living. So I would emphasize that there are several institutional reforms that are required. One is around urbanization, another is around business. The very notion of work and retirement as an institution needs to change. And so these are just some ideas about how we're trying to drive that.
Can I just I want to just connect Mike's point with something Fernando said earlier. So one of the things, Mike, that I think this slide is missing is the power of intergenerational relationships, because we know, and this is again research-based, that mixed generation teams consistently outperform same generation teams. So for those interested in competitive business, you don't stick two 30-year-olds in a room, even if they have PhDs in computer science from Stanford, and expect that they're going to come up with the most creative solution in your skunkworks project. You want to stick a 30-year-old and a 65-year-old in a room together, complementary skills. So the reason I say that is we measure people with a baseline that's based on the characteristics of youth. It kind of goes to Fernando's point about design, right? So we call on young people without necessarily acculturating younger people to the notion that age is really about them too. It's not just about people in the generation of some of the people up on stage. So part of the power of older workers is making younger workers better. And by the way, younger workers make older workers better. And part of the power of intergenerational teams in design is together they'll make better cities.
Fernando?
Yeah, I think what we're all kind of facing is certainly the dramatic demographic changes we're facing, and it may not be overstating that never in the history of humankind have we all had a chance to live this much longer. Yeah. So in a sense, we're all kind of making it up as we go along. But what I'd like to suggest, recommend as part of this is how do we re-socialize all of us, but especially younger persons, to integrate in their DNA that I may live to be 100 years of age. I love teaching undergraduates at UCLA, and I required them in my undergraduate course to fill out what I call a personal longevity plan. And I said the one criteria is assume you will live to be 100 years of age. Now, what will you do to plan for that long lifespan? And I give them 5 categories: the traditional retirement financial planning, but then also a number of things that you've all mentioned. How will you address your social support needs? You know, you want to be with people, et cetera. How will you plan for health, long-term care, transportation, and ultimately the vicissitudes of aging? You won't always be a healthy 21-year-old. I also have them address end of life. Hey, at some point it's all going to come to an end. How do you plan for that end of life? And then lastly, what are the psychological, emotional transitions you must undergo as you deal with this new revolutionary opportunity to live to be 100 years of age? At first, the students are all, excuse the term, all freaked out. But after we get through the quarter, they start getting excited, not just about the possibilities, but I need to rethink how I will plan out that long lifespan.
They can't imagine being 30, let alone
I know,
100.
Right? So perhaps re-socializing and gerontologizing young people to accept these new realities.
I like that.
And you know, your point, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing we didn't touch on, and back to what Fernando said earlier, is that, you know, that's a great portrait, but not all the older people of today are educated or have all these skills to give back. But I think the other message that I often give to younger audiences is aging is where the jobs are. One of the reasons why we're restructuring all of our healthcare systems is healthcare is really one of the few really successful industries, and we're looking at now how to re-employ and retrain people. So for example, for direct care workforce, which is a tremendous need and can deliver care in a much more cost-effective way, culturally competent way, but putting some investments in lower wage workers to help in this field to help people have more successful aging, I think is a huge opportunity for people to look at how to grow our workforce to get livable wages and working in fields where we really need more people in them.
Nora would know the stats better than I do. What about 50 million caregivers in the United States? So I mean, Joe, if you just think about for any investors in the audience, so the potential power of this to affect that cohort. Right, so the potential education, we all know that we're increasingly in a world of accountable care organizations in the traditional health space, but the possibility for accountable caregiving and for educated caregiving using mobile technology, just by way of example of one potential innovation, huge opportunities. So this kind of underscores Mike's point again. Social interests, this is kind of the ultimate impact in investing opportunities. Social interests are interested in improving lives across the age spectrum, and the potential for really explosive innovations and huge returns. And I think in the last number of years, the top performing sectors have been technology and health.
Well, on that point, and taking the specific caregiving illustration, the dirty little secret is that one of the great drivers of corporate change, or I shouldn't even say corporate, employer change, is that increasingly workers, roughly 48 to, let's say, 60-year-old workers, have the greatest concern, one of their great concerns, around caregiving for their parents. Nora alluded to it. We all have been talking about it. Fernando talked about it. We have, for the first time in the history of the planet, multi-generations living at the same time, which is another interesting sociological factor that we don't really focus on. We say old, but don't talk about the intergenerational. And the growing array of data around productivity loss for workers inside any employer organization. It could be a company, it could be an NGO, it could be any government, it could be any organization, is huge. And when you think about it, you know, the 53-year-old, usually it's the woman, although increasingly it could be men as well, whose mother just had a fall or whose father's Alzheimer's just got a little worse, you know, is actually spending more time either on the phone or online or just sitting at his or her desk worried about this than actually doing their work or on the assembly plant or wherever it is. And so the technology component to address that. But this is a huge topic that we've only begun to get a little bit of data on. Again, you know, one of the several companies in our global coalition are working on it. Aegon is one, Home Instead is another, Intel, BlackRock. I mean, it's very, very interesting. And they're looking at it from a broad array of data across the globe. It's not just in America.
One of the things that we were asking about the age-ready city, and I think the underlying assumption is that we know that the city is not quite ready for it. So let's just make it a little bit more difficult, because one of the things that we're not thinking about is that we're not just the first to age as long as we hopefully will be living, but there's a few different things going on. We had far fewer children, and the number one way of caring for an aging society are our children. And good parents quite often will say to their children when they're young and able, there may not be the jobs here for you, please go and find a job. So if you're in rural China, or maybe you're in Shanghai and your kids had to move to Guangzhou or something like that, you've told them to go find opportunity. We tend to look at the age-ready city on the things that we can see, transportation and housing. But is the city even ready for the shortage of a care force, the shortage of family, the social services? Is that on the agenda as well? That's harder to measure than is the transit system working on time. Has anyone come across that? Fernando?
I think that becomes a serious issue. Already we know that 1/3 of baby boomers are going to be living alone.
40% of baby boomer women over 65 today live by themselves.
Are going to be living alone. So a real crisis of who's going to take care of me. A place like Los Angeles, coming back to the issues of aging and diversity, one of our great advantages besides great weather, et cetera, is we have an immigrant, diverse population who are more willing and need to be the home care workers, the long-term care workforce. So that is our great advantage. One of my concerns, though, as I grow older in Los Angeles, our kids have moved away, one is in Boston, is more of these ethnic minority groups who are ready to do this are moving to the suburbs or having to leave the city. So it creates a real problem. Who will take care of me when I can't take care of myself? And I still want to live in the city. And as I like to say to my audiences, you know, we all want our kids to be attorneys, to be professors, to be the next startup billionaire. But how many of us raise our children to be home care workers? Yep. So we don't give the prestige or the status to the need to get younger persons
apparently
to
we're
take
not
an
even
interest.
training them to want to be doctors. The average doctor in the United States today is 53 years old. The average nurse is 50. So just when we need the care force, they've aged out.
Well, look, I mean, to me, you've asked an extraordinarily important question, Joe, which I think is ultimately a big culture question. One of the things I often speak about and write about is the notion that we invest in populations that we care about, and I think as evidence of that, if we look at whether it's healthcare investment or investment in education infrastructure or transportation or anything else in communities of color, historically for women and other communities, we underinvested. Why did we do that? We can all answer those questions. And right now we're underinvesting for older adults because I think we assume that our older adults really aren't particularly valuable. I mean, I think that kind of goes to the ageism challenge. I think if Alzheimer's was a disease of a different generational cohort, we would send up flares, and the President of the United States would send the 100 smartest scientists in the United States to New Mexico and say, don't come back until you've answered the question, because the cost of this disease, as Mike could tell you, runs the risk of breaking in the United States and breaking China first. So I think one of the things that we have to focus on for older people, I know this will be something that resonates with Fernando, is the contribution they can make to younger people. We're going to have to cross families. We're going to have to give care to people who aren't necessarily our relatives, our children, our parents, et cetera. As older people, anyone who took, I'm the non-scientist on the stage, but anyone who took, a Psych 101 class in college studied Erik Erikson and learned something about generativity, this increasing inclination we have as we age to mentor, to serve younger people and all the rest. And those younger people don't necessarily have to be our own. So I think if we can create a stronger culture of care and engagement and involvement, not just in our own families, as important as those involvements are, but in the broader society, I think that will ultimately flow both ways. And maybe, Fernando, part of the answer to those women living alone is getting them today, at least the boomers, out serving young people who will ultimately serve them.
Let me ask one more difficult question, at least I think will be difficult, and then we'll see if we've got some folks in the audience here that might want to engage with us. Ultimately, issues are owned by certain groups. There is no universal issue that is everyone cares about X. No, certain groups are owned by people. So I come from the transportation world. Basically, you can't say anything until you talk to a civil engineer or people that basically want to do transit or the like. And we think that aging is universal once we're there, but most people don't think about aging as universal until they're of a certain age. We don't know what that age is quite right. I want to ask the group, how are we going to define the age-ready city as an issue that's not just on the agenda, but one where the mayor and the city council can say, I'm going to put housing aside, crumbling infrastructure aside, certain levels of the people trying to get to work, transit investment versus the dial-a-ride service up front on the agenda. So I don't want just agenda status. I want money.
Yeah. So I love the question, which I will answer in two ways. One is to say what I think today the problem is, and then to give you the solution. So I think the problem is that today the topic generally is owned by these, let's call it the social service, social welfare community. That's the problem. They have a role, but they shouldn't own it, and if they continue to own it, we're sunk. The second solution, it seems to me, is it's a fiscal problem. This is an economic and fiscal problem. If we want to continue to grow economically, if we want to have prosperity and wealth creation, so we can do all the good things we talk about and all the good things that the social welfare community wants, it has to be owned. I mean, this should not be something, pardon me, but I want OMB taking the American approach, or Treasury to care more about this than HHS. I want the ministries of finance across Europe to care about this, not the Ministry of Health. Now, let's get everyone in the act, but it has to be seen as a question of economic growth and prosperity.
Fernando, I specifically wanted to get your response on this, because we were talking about different minority communities, gentrification as issues. Those are interests and groups that there's got to be some sort of trade-off or collaboration to get this not just on the agenda, to put money forth. So who's going to give up their cash for this older group?
I'm going to ask Paul also to address the issues of the mayor's pledge, but let's just say this. We do have, and I have to be careful how I say this, Nora, because I have to follow a party line of sorts, but we do have a politics of aging where certain interest groups own these issues. In this case, the advocacy groups for the elderly own certain areas. We have electoral groups now, and in a place like California, increasingly it's the unions and ethnic lobbies that own certain issues. But nobody seems to own the cross-generational commitment and obligation to get beyond age definitions. In a place like LA and big cities, it's your area agency on aging, or your county area agency on aging, or a senior citizen commission. So we have segregated, to certain little cubby holes, how we deal with the issues of longevity. So I think, Paul, this is where the great work you've done with the mayors come in.
So just a very fast comment on that, and then I want to turn to the mayor's pledge for a second. So I was at a really interesting session that our friend Laura Carstensen ran up at Stanford, and there was a woman who worked for the governor of Washington State, who I just thought had a really, really interesting observation, and it was exactly this, Joe. She said, we have a little dinky aging agency. They have no money. They have no power. No power. We try to get them as much attention as we can. She said, here's the problem. She said, an aging population, this shifting demographic, low birth rates, increasing longevity, ultimately touches everything we do. So she said, so here's my objective. We have a development department, really powerful. It's the real estate interests in the state, focused on the nature of zoning and infrastructure and restrictions and entitlements and a huge amount of wealth. We have a huge health agency. We have a big transportation agency. We have an agency that focuses on public education and universities. One on culture. She said, so here's my objective. Each one of them has a meeting, I'm making it up, once a quarter, right? They have a meeting of their commissioners once a quarter. So she said, they get a written agenda and they get a book and they get financials and they get various other things. She said, my objective is on the agenda of every single one of these agencies, every single meeting, the word aging, longevity, or older adults, aging population needs to exist. And I think that deals with the cross-sectoral challenge. So one of the things we thought about, so we did this report and we said, well, this is great. So a bunch of people in the field are interested in this. Who cares? What are we really doing with it? So we came up with this idea of doing a mayor's pledge to address Joe's point about using data, using facts. Facts are stubborn things to try to lever attention and lever action. So we can have the next slide. I think that's slide 5. So this is what the pledge says. We won't read it, but fundamentally it focuses on two things. One creating a better infrastructure for this changing demographic in all the areas we've talked about. And two, I think equally important, going to my point about elevating the value of older people in society, asking mayors to do their part to enable older people to give back, to provide services through purposeful work and volunteerism and a range of things. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see just some of the cities. We had about 140 cities signed. There's our mayor, Eric Garcetti, signing it. And the good news is, Nora and I think, are speaking at something around Aging LA next week. We've, I think, begun to create some identity, some visibility for this kind of thing in mayoral offices across the United States. And frankly, my ask to people in the audience would be, and I always let me be presumptuous and make an ask, is if you're involved in public policy, if you're involved in business, if you're involved in civil society, to get this discussion to the table, to make sure it's on the agenda, to make sure it's included as one of those things that is an extraordinarily important phenomenon that we have to deal with for the future. So, Joe.
There's a very nice lady back there with a sign telling me that I'm running short on time. So I'm going to ask a summary question, then you can accost the august group here as we exit with other questions. Question for you. Are we going to make it in time with one, if we want to make this United States based, with one baby boomer turning 69 every 7 to 8 seconds? And if we got our investments in alignment, are we going to make the age-ready city in time for, frankly, us? Mike?
Yes, because I think the marketplace is beginning to see the opportunity, the need and the opportunity. And I think you will begin to get the kind of investment from the private sector that will then hopefully create some of the solutions and partner with government for the change. So I'm actually very optimistic.
Nora.
Well, my boss is very optimistic and is trying to look forward to the future, and I think
Therefore, you are
I am optimistic too. I think there
record.
are political forces right now that make it hard to come up with solutions. So I do totally agree this has to come from local communities and building up and people seeing the power. I mean, when you all were speaking earlier, I was thinking about the president you worked for who, used the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." And I think, we go back to that. And the one thing that we can see that Americans really come together to agree on is that they want a strong economy and they want our country to thrive. And so my sense is that it's imperative that we do this or we won't be a strong economy anymore.
Paul.
I'm generally an optimist, so I've got to be optimistic. But I think that the
You
heat.
also had a caveat.
I think the heat needs to be turned up really significantly. I think that we have a series of challenges that are going to be very difficult for a number of boomers to overcome, financial insecurity and health challenges. I think we have a shot of creating an unbelievable society for our kids, and I think, frankly, we'll do ourselves good if we focus on that. Some good. We may not do as much good as we can, but if we get our kids involved in the discussion, we get those in their 20s and 30s today involved in this conversation, and we make the investments necessary, by the time they're into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and as Fernando says, if longevity scientists have their way, 90, 100, 110, they'll live in phenomenal cities.
Older driver starts at 100. Fernando.
I'm hopeful, if for no other reason, that 78 million ornery baby boomers will eventually realize they're getting old and will demand change.
Sounds good. Let me end on the fact that I think if we can redefine this around quality of life across a lifespan and make it so it's an investment not just in any one cohort or group, I think that we do, in fact, have not just an opportunity, but speaking as one of those ornery, largest, loudest generation, the baby boomers, our legacy might be, if we get to work on time, leaving a better planet behind us for our kids and grandkids to grow up in. Please join me in thanking my panel.
Thank you.